All right, so today we're going to dive deep into something that I think is really fascinating. And that's this whole idea of leaving Israel, especially with everything going on,
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic right now.
for sure, for sure. And I think it gets even more interesting when you start looking at specific cases, like, Paula and Leon Rosenberg choosing to stay outside of Israel.
Oh, yeah, that's been sparking some pretty intense debates.
Yeah, it has. And that's kind of what we're going to be looking at today. We found this video discussion about it gets pretty heated.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, yeah. So the first speaker, right off the bat, they just come out swinging. They're calling it abandonment and even like theft. It's pretty intense.
Wow, that's some pretty loaded language. You can really sense the emotion behind it. Like, it's not just a difference of opinion, it's something much deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what makes this so fascinating. Like, what are those unspoken expectations that are driving these strong reactions?
Right. What are people assuming about those who choose to live outside Israel, especially now?
Exactly. And it makes you wonder about this whole idea of collective responsibility,
Yeah.
especially when a society is facing these existential threats.
Yeah, and you can't ignore that historical context of Jewish persecution either. That adds a whole other layer to it.
For sure. Now, the second speaker in the video, they seem a little more hesitant.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, they agree with that point about commitment to a shared homeland, but you can kind of tell they're wrestling with it a bit, like they're trying to understand it on a personal level too.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's that push and pull between individual choices and that sense of responsibility to something bigger than yourself.
Right. It's not a simple issue. Then they make this comment about Paula and Leon returning with their tails between their legs.
Yeah.
Kind of a harsh image, don't you think?
Yeah, it definitely suggests there's a social cost to leaving. Like, you'll face judgment, maybe even shame for making that decision.
So it's not just about individual choices. It's about how those choices are perceived by the community.
Exactly. And I think that speaks to this deeply ingrained belief that unity is crucial for survival, especially when you consider that historical context of persecution.
It's like that past is always there, informing how people view these decisions in the present.
Absolutely. It adds this whole other dimension, tying personal choices to this larger narrative of resilience and shared fate.
And speaking of history, the speaker then starts talking about Jewish identity, like the importance of being connected to history as a reason for staying in Israel. They even contrast it with just living where it's convenient.
That's where the concept of chosenness in Judaism comes into play, and how different people interpret it can really influence their decisions. It goes beyond just belonging to a religion. There's this sense of duty, almost a divine obligation to the land of Israel.
So it becomes more than just living somewhere. It's about fulfilling a destiny. That's a powerful concept.
It really is. And for some, it creates this internal conflict between personal desires and this sense of communal, even spiritual responsibility.
And I wonder how people view Paul and Leon's decision through that lens.
Right. Does their choice to live elsewhere mean they don't feel that sense of responsibility? Or are they defining it differently?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it makes this whole discussion even more complicated. It's not just black and white, right? There's so many layers here.
Absolutely. And we're just scratching the surface here. There's so much more to unpack as we go deeper into this video and all the different perspectives it offers.
You're telling me this is just the beginning of our deep dive. Stay with us.
You know, it's funny. The speaker keeps coming back to this idea of Israel as like just a place to live, like it's bothering them?
Yeah, like it's missing something deeper. But isn't that kind of a generalization, though? People live in places for all sorts of reasons.
Oh, for sure, you're right. But I think for this speaker, and maybe for a lot of people, that deeper meaning is rooted in what Israel represents? It's
Yeah.
about reclaiming a homeland after all that history, all that, well, persecution.
So for them, leaving might feel like a betrayal of all that.
Yeah, like you're turning your back on everything that people fought for, especially with all the security threats Israel's facing right now.
So it's like, with all those threats, there's this pressure to stick together.
Exactly. And that's where the whole Paula and Leon thing gets tricky. Because their decision, no matter the reason, might be seen as like breaking that unity.
It becomes a symbol, right? Even if they didn't mean it that way.
Totally. And their celebrity status just makes it even bigger. It's not just a personal choice anymore. It's everyone's business.
So it's like their story becomes this reflection of all those anxieties people have.
Right. And this is where the video gets interesting, I think, because the speaker, they even talk about walking away from people who disagree. And then they kind of backtrack and say, like, we need understanding.
Yeah, there's this tension, right, between wanting everyone on the same page, but also feeling frustrated when people break ranks.
Exactly, and you can hear that in their voice. It's tough, holding those two things at once. Then they say winning or losing together, and that really hits home.
It does. But then that raises the question, what does winning together even look like when everyone's got such different ideas about, well, everything?
That's the million-dollar question, and it goes way beyond Israel. It's
Yeah.
something a lot of countries are facing right now.
Yeah, for sure. With people moving around more than ever, that idea of belonging, it gets complicated fast.
Totally. Like, what does it even mean to be a citizen these days? And in a place like Israel, where history and religion are so tied up with national identity, well, things get even more intense.
So thinking about the Rosenbergs, it's even more than just them leaving Israel, right? It's all this other stuff mixed in too.
Absolutely. It's like their story is a window into all this stuff Israel's dealing with.
It makes you realize these questions about where you belong, they're not going away anytime soon.
Nope, they're just getting more and more complicated. And that's what makes this whole thing so interesting to dive into, right?
For sure. It's about way more than just Paula and Leon. It's about what it means to be part of something bigger, how those feelings change.
Exactly. It's less about judging people and more about trying to understand why they do what they do.
And how those decisions affect everything else.
You got it. And in their case, well, those effects are huge EE.
It's crazy how this all ties into the whole anti-Semitism thing. It's happening everywhere.
Yeah, it's like their story with Paula and Leon, it shows you that it's not just an Israel problem.
Right. Like that example they gave in the video about that guy getting kicked out of a restaurant just because he was wearing a Star of David.
Ugh, that's awful. It's like no matter where you go, that stuff can still happen.
Exactly. So, leaving Israel doesn't mean you're safe.
Right. No. And I think that's a big part of what makes this whole conversation so hard. It's not just about should you stay or should you go. It's also about facing this reality that anti-Semitism exists everywhere.
It adds a whole other dimension to it.
For sure. You can't just say, I'm going to leave and everything will be fine. It's
Yeah.
way more complicated than that.
It's not that simple.
Not at all. It's about so much more than just personal choices. It's about this global thing.
And I think that's what the speaker was trying to get at, at the end there, when they talk about unity and understanding.
Yeah, I noticed that too. It's like they realized you can't just shut people out because you disagree with them.
And I think that's something we could all learn from.
Yeah.
It's hard disagreeing with people, especially about stuff that's important to you.
Absolutely. But like they said, you win or lose together.
Man, that's a powerful statement. But it also makes you think, how do you even DO that when everyone has such different ideas?
Yeah, that's the tough part, isn't it? How do you find that common ground?
And how do you talk about these things without, losing it,
It's all about empathy, I think, remembering that everyone has their own story.
Yeah, and trying to see things from their perspective, even if you don't agree with them.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, we're all human, right? We're all in this together.
So what do we want our listeners to take away from all this?
I'd say the big takeaway is that this isn't about right or wrong. Leaving Israel, it's a huge decision. It's personal.
There's no easy answer.
Exactly. And it's more than just what you want. It's history, it's family, even your beliefs. It's all tied up in it.
It's about understanding all that and having a little empathy for people who see things differently.
That's it. Not judging, just trying to understand.
Well said. This has been quite a deep dive, wouldn't you say?
For sure. And these conversations, they're important.
They are. Thanks for joining us on this one. And to our listeners, keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep talking to each other. See you next time.